Hiya. So I'd like to start off this video with a bit of a request. I don't want anyone to go and post any hate or misogynistic abuse to any of the subjects covered in this video. What you can do instead is just let the truth speak for itself. Post this video of nothing but facts under their content. Expose the truth. Let them know you know the truth. And we can go from there. This should appeal to both left, far left, centrists, right and far right. This is a non-partisan video and it should explain what is going on at the BBC regarding Marianna Spring and her team of specialist disinformation spreaders, because she's not an expert, they don't do her homework, and it's just controlled opposition by a cognitive elite. So, fascists, beware of Marianna Spring.
I'm a neo-reactionary absolutist. I believe in a absolute world order, organized in a particular way.
When you're looking at a government is a corporation that owns a country. It just is. It's the same thing.
I'm Peter Thiel. I support people who are building new things. I'm not a politician, but neither is Donald Trump. And it's time to rebuild America.
Anything we can do to help this go along, and we're going to be there for you. And you'll call my people, you'll call me. It doesn't make any difference. We have no formal chain of command.
I wanted to make this video last week, but I wasn't happy with the amount of information I was able to gather. I didn't think there was quite enough. But today she's released a tweet saying, delighted to be shortlisted for the Gold Award in memory of John Lelou at the BBC News Awards. And the Panorama into Online Hate has been shortlisted for Investigation of the Year. It's just more kind of backslapping of herself. Attention seeking. It's completely undeserved. There's plenty more people, women included, who are combating far-right disinformation. They've actually had to go to court and get injunctions against certain people to stop them harassing or threatening them. So she's nothing special. She's in this work for a reason, and it's not to counter disinformation. It's to be a controlled opposition and to gatekeep information and distract from certain things. For instance, she talks about the anti-lockdown and anti-vaccine misinformation out there quite a lot, but this kind of highlights what I'm talking about. So this is from the 24th of November. She looks into the anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine conspiracies that are going around, and here she is reporting on the violence that broke out in the Netherlands a week or two ago. She retweeted this from a guy called David Glass. Reporting works. Marianna kicking ass again. And that's because after her report on these, Facebook had removed the Dutch anti-vax group who were mostly responsible for the misinformation that led to those riots. So it's interesting to note that she knows that reporting works in highlighting these issues in order to get organizations to remove that disinformation from their platforms. So why is it we still have the most prominent conspiracy theorist and misinformation person still on Facebook from the UK, Piers Corbyn? He's been advocating for attacking our institutions, ripping down vaccine centres, 5G towers. He's basically committing stochastic terrorism on a daily basis. Why, if she can get someone removed from in the Netherlands, why can't she get Piers Corbyn removed? So let's take a bit of a closer look. Here's his page still up with 15,000 people liking it, 24,000 people following his Facebook page. Not only is she countering anti-lockdown and anti-vaccine conspiracies, she's moving into anti-climate change misinformation and where that's coming from. And obviously Piers Corbyn is responsible for both of those things, being Boris Johnson's weatherman. So let's see what she's got to say on this BBC Radio Sounds programme called The Denial Files, From COVID Conspiracy to Climate Change Denial.
And recently I've seen a marked shift. Some members of this online movement are turning their attention from COVID and towards climate change. And now the latest research suggests the natural world is becoming a new front line for disinformation.
Now, she refers to it as a new frontline. The anti-climate change information out there, or disinformation, conspiracy theories, whatever, is a new frontier. It's nothing new. It's been going on for quite a while. Here's George Monbiot, retweeted by Aaron Bastini from Novara Media. Why the media is to blame for climate inaction. Even in the 1990s, when the scale of the problem was becoming clear, those commissioning programs for Channel 4 and the BBC wanted less climate content, not more. So this is nothing new. It's not a new frontier. This has been going on for at least 3 decades. Why is she referring to it as a new frontier? It's nothing new, and it's expected. Back in July, George Monbiot, how the BBC let climate deniers walk all over it. So BBC are culpable in this spread of disinformation coming from respected journalists like George Monbiot. And like I say, Piers Corbyn is Boris Johnson's friend, in Boris's own words, as we can hear here.
Let me go back to your climate sceptic views, because you rely a lot on a weatherman called Dr. Piers Corbyn. And I understand he's never been published in any scientific journal that does peer reviews. And one of yours, John Gummer, has said, former Conservative Environment Secretary, he said, no reasonable person would ignore expert opinion and wager his children's future on the contrarian views of people who are not peer-reviewed. In science, peer review is terribly important.
Yeah,
and you're relying for your views on somebody who isn't peer-reviewed.
Well,
and he's a weatherman.
I was interested in some of the things. I didn't know that. I'm interested in what you say about Piers Corbyn, who's after all the brother of staunch Labour MP Jeremy Corbyn. He's got an interesting take on the weather we've been experiencing, which I thought was worthy of note, because actually I do remember 20 years ago, when this whole thing kicked off, we were told that there was this thing called global warming, and there still is, and that is, that is the fundamental problem, and the greenhouse gas, the greenhouse effect is leading, and anthropogenic greenhouse gases are, I'm sure, leading to greater propensity for the planet to warm. However, the interesting thing is that may also be coinciding, and this is I think scientifically possible, with a solar minimum of the kind that the planet has experienced before.
You must understand that the overwhelming scientific consensus is that climate change is happening, and quite honestly, well, if you do have climate sceptic views, I
don't.
Oh, you don't?
Come on, no, of course not.
What's all this stuff in your Telegraph article? You're just making it up, aren't you?
Remotely.
So there you have it. He has climate skeptic views, and he bases his information from non-peer-reviewed studies by people like Piers Corbyn. Completely aghast are the people questioning him on his views on that, as should anyone be. So we have people like Piers Corbyn, Haiku here, who are at the forefront of anti-vaccine and anti-lockdown misinformation. They're moving into the anti-climate sphere, and let's see how Marianna Spring deals with these people and counters their misinformation. I've searched on Marianna Spring's profile for Piers. No results. She's never mentioned Piers Corbyn. He's pretty much the go-to man for anti-vaccine, anti-lockdown conspiracy theories, as well as the climate. No mention of it. Haiku, no mention of him. The Heart Group, who are one of the organisations, a collective of prominent people who are working together to get this information into the mainstream media. No mention of it. The only mention of Hart is a woman called Amy Hart, which is completely unrelated to this topic. David Curtin, no mention of him. Dominic Cummings, only one mention of him back in 2020, nothing to do with disinformation. Cambridge Analytica, the organisation at the forefront of misinformation due to Brexit, no mention of it. There's been plenty of mention of Cambridge Analytica from across the States and in other publications about the amount of misinformation on social media that they were responsible for. She just doesn't mention them once. Cambridge University had banned remembrance properties. Palantir, no mention of him. Peter Thiel, no mention of him. Steve Bannon, one mention of him back in 2020, October, before the insurrection. Another person who is responsible for a lot of the misinformation, especially QAnon, another thing that she likes to specialize in, no mention of him. The insurrection, one mention of an insurrection in May. The insurrection on the Capitol Hill was January the 6th, and there's one mention of it. It's only mentioned in protecting Donald Trump, saying that he was acquitted of a charge of inciting the insurrection at the US Capitol. When you search for riot on her profile, she minimizes the insurrection as riots. Like, riots to me are just kind of property damage. It doesn't really give you that sense that there was an attempt to overturn the democracy. Whether Trump was responsible for it or not, there was a definite attempt to disrupt the certification of the democratic result that were announcing Biden as the president. She just minimizes that as riots, and she does that over and over and over and over and over again. She's very, very keen on minimizing that event as a riot instead of an attack on democracy. So we look for democracy, and she does mention democracy a lot, and she mentions disinformation in that same tweets. And she's saying things like, how did this disinformation spread online for months pave the way for doubts about election integrity? How is this different to 2016? What is its impact on democracy? So she's making the point that disinformation online impacts democracy in some way. Faith in democracy eroded, relationships broken, and lives ruined. January 21, that's 2 weeks after the insurrection. Beyond protests, experts fear online disinformation has undermined faith in democracy for millions. So she'll go on about democracy again and again and again, and how misinformation turns people off from democracy. So she's right there. But why isn't she talking about that in regards to the insurrection? Here's a tweet. Our latest from BBC. So this is back in 2019. Our latest from BBC Trending. Lots of people aren't getting their election news from the mainstream media. They're getting it from Facebook. We interviewed the volunteer activist from Herefordshire to Yorkshire who runs some of the most important pages. A woman who runs an anti-Brexit page makes her Facebook network sound like a military operation. Activists work in remote cells all over the UK, chatting all day on Slack and Telegram and pumping out the links, memes and Twitter screenshots like this one. Corbyn cannot be trusted on national security, says Michael Gove, as his government refuses to publish report into Russian interference in our elections. So if we look at who sent this, a blue tick, no less, it's David Schneider, actor, writer, director, fool, less ranty version at Instagram. He's got over 500,000 followers. He's not the kind of person to be spewing out disinformation, and it's interesting that she'll call him out for it, but not people like Piers Corbyn and Haiku Koo. There's nothing actually wrong with this tweet. There's no misinformation there. Is it to minimize the fact that she's a Russian agent since she studied there and worked for the media in Russia? Is it to minimize the fact that it's Russian interference in our elections, in our media institutions, and it's partly Russia's fault for all this misinformation that's been spread? So she's on here with Ollie from Politics Joe, talking about conspiracy theorists and her experience in her role. Let's see what she has to say to him.
Okay, QAnon. What the fuck is that all about? I mean, please, because I pay attention to it a bit. I try to understand it, but it's deep. There's a lot there, and you are an expert in it. So please, try and give us the cliff notes of what the QAnon conspiracy theory is about.
So I have my ready-made phrase, which I always use, but perhaps people are like, what on earth is she talking about? Which is, at its heart, it's this belief that Trump is waging this secret war and that there are satanic paedophiles who are in government, in business, in media, who are running everything. And it began after the 2016 election. It was a conspiracy that sprung up on the fringes of the internet and then found its way into the mainstream, and actually has been very good at rebranding itself. So we saw before the US election last year, they started using terms like save the children, save our children, to make this conspiracy more palatable and actually reach more people. And you saw how particularly a lot of younger women and parents were then being drawn into this very powerful motif of child abuse, which obviously is horrific, but that was being misappropriated in order to promote political disinformation. I think the important thing about QAnon, and in many ways it's very, very similar to all kinds of conspiracy movements and mentalities, is the ability it has to sow seeds of doubt so that people no longer trust anything, and it plays into that distrust, and it then becomes a vehicle to promote harmful and false views, because people, they don't trust anything. And often people have very legitimate reasons for not trusting institutions or politicians or all kinds of different people, but they are then being conned by someone else rather than actually being saved, which a lot of them think. And we saw with QAnon, I did quite a lot of reporting this time last year, start of this year, when obviously we saw the riots at Capitol Hill, about how QAnon, laid the groundwork for what happened there, and a lot of the kind of QAnon influencers were pictured at Capitol Hill, and I think people often think of it quite rightly as this very quirky, very strange conspiracy view, and when you get into it, it's really hard to understand why or how people would believe it.
So again, she minimizes the insurrection. She correctly says that the QAnon was partly responsible for it, but it completely ignores the fact that there's Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys, and the Oath Keepers, other groups that were more impactful in the attempted assault on America's democracy. She completely just bypasses that more important point and minimizes the insurrection as just a riot of stupid conspiracy theorists. That's her kind of like take on it. And also, I'm not for QAnon, but there is a bit of grey area. She's right about what QAnon is, but she just doesn't get or wants to distract from the fact that there is something similar to the satanic pedophiles ruling the world kind of thing, and that is Jeffrey Epstein. I think it was today on radio, BBC Radio, that Ghislaine Maxwell was in the room while one of the victims was being sexually assaulted. And we know about Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book, and he got away with this behavior for so long, even though lots of prominent figures obviously knew what was going on, especially Trump, from his own gaslighting comments on the issue, saying that everybody knows about what was going on there, and then when he gets in a position of power, he's like, oh, I didn't know. And guess who's in his little black book? Donald Trump. If we go back to Marianna Spring, what she does like to talk about is her own work and her own work only. And if we look for Kate Shemirani, let's just change this just so we don't get other Kates in there. So we just put Shemirani. Yeah, that's how you spell it. Like, she's just talking about Kate Shemirani non-stop. She loves it. She's done some work on Kate Shemirani, and she just can't stop talking about her. And the things that we don't learn from Marianna Spring about Kate Shemirani are the most important things. Like, she's a fucking Nazi. A Hitler-saluting Nazi. So that's not the only time. She's quite a frequent Nazi saluter. It's not just a one-off for her. Also, what we don't learn from Marianna Spring about Kate Shemirani is her promotion and sale and profit from trying to make out that bleach, chlorine dioxide, or colloidal silver chlorine dioxide, DMSO, is something that she's selling, and at the same time trying to convince people that it's effective for treating COVID, which she doesn't think exists. Here we can see it's described as a miracle mineral supplement, chlorine dioxide solution, and it's the same thing that Donald Trump was promoting.
1 minute, and is there a way we can do something like that?
Disinfectant.
Injection inside, or almost a cleaning, because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number on the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with, but it's.
Like, he just literally doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. No mention about this from Marianna Spring. Where's the disinformation expert when you need her? On the person that she's focusing bulk of her work on. Another person who she's obsessed with is Kate Shemirani's son, Sebastian. You can just see here that her tweets go on and on and on and on about Sebastian. It's like she has some sort of crush on him. But I'm sure that's not the case. You can find out more about why she's focusing on Sebastian Shemirani in my video, Fascists Beware of the Cognitive Elite, where you find out that he also has very far-right views, very anti-left views, and he's appeared on far-right propaganda channels like James Delingpole. So for someone who is a misinformation expert, she's platforming people who literally specialize in spreading misinformation. And you'll find that in this video, Sebastian Shemirani did about 4 or more interviews with different media outlets. And the one that he chose to put on his pinned tweet on Twitter was his interview with another conspiracy theorist, Majid Nawaz. So it's just this circle of endorsement by a supposed respectable organization. They endorse these figures, and then when they get the opportunity to return the favor, they just pick the most toxic platform that they can and people that spread more and more disinformation. So she's just adding fuel to the disinformation fire. Interestingly, Marianna Spring has engaged with my Twitter feed once. I was surprised that this got 6 million views. I've not even been anywhere close. I'm not even. I think I've probably had like maybe 1 or 2 that have gone into 6 figures. But I've had I just didn't have a clue that this would blow up to 6 million views as it did. It's Kate Shemirani on Trafalgar Square. Well, listen for yourselves.
protonmail.com with a group of lawyers. We are collating all that. At the Nuremberg trials, the doctors and nurses stood trial and they hung. If you are a doctor or a nurse, now is the time to get off that bus.
As you probably know already, I've been reporting on the anti-vaccine, anti-lockdown protests since they started. I've been doing them on a weekly, at least, sometimes twice weekly, sometimes more, reporting on exactly what's happening at each of them. And this event came up at about 1:15. It probably happened at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I tweeted it, and then people started picking it up. Eventually, Marianna Spring did retweet it, but let's see what she was up to on that day and how she reported on it. We can see that she didn't start reporting on what was going on at this protest until 2:05, so about an hour after Kate Shemirani had made that particular speech. Anti-lockdown protesters have again gathered in central London, even though restrictions have lifted. Opposition to vaccine passports has become muddled with online conspiracies. As I reported for Newsnight, this movement is about more than COVID-19. So instantly you can see my tweet's probably blown up. I don't know how many views it would have had by this time, but she's not interested in promoting me. She's only interested in promoting herself and her historical work. Second tweet. she'd already spoke to Sebastian Shemirani by that point, and a few minutes later she says several speakers at the rally are well known for promoting conspiracies about the pandemic online. That includes former nurse Kate Shemirani, who has been struck off. I interviewed her son and spoke to her for a panorama investigation into anti-vax tactics. Next one. At 2:20. Catch the full film from, so that's like 10 minutes it took her to write this next tweet. Catch the full film from BBC Newsnight here. Those I interviewed believe in nefarious global agendas spread on Telegram that exploit political criticisms and concerns. Big fear is where this online movement is heading, and radicalization to violence. Again, a topic that I've covered extensively, if only she'd bother to look. Next one, at 3:00, still ignoring the actual tweet that's blowing up and probably has close to 1 million or more by now. There's increasing discussion online and offline at rallies like today's about Nuremberg trials and executions, again, worlds apart from reasonable criticisms. Last time I covered protest, I spotted my name on a sign. This time, I'm getting messages like this one. So here she is making it about herself. Like, I've had to fucking move out of my home because of my reporting. I'm getting no help from any mainstream media to protect me at all. It's like, what are you doing? So that's at 3:00. She's obviously desperate to control the narrative for herself and create the story in her own image and with her as the victim. The only victims in this story should be the doctors and nurses that they're threatening. When you're a journalist, you don't become the story. I've been the story lots because I'm not a fucking journalist at the end of the day. I'm trying to become one now because I can't do my old job anymore. This was just a hobby for me. But so you know that I'm telling the truth. So 3:20. These rallies are happening globally today, from Australia to Slovakia to Russia to Japan, where restrictions all vary. Common thread is the extreme online conspiracies fueling this global movement, spread on social media sites without borders. And then eventually at 4:15, so 3 hours after this tweet was made, when she's obviously seen it because she's referenced it and spoken about it, this shows the very worrying talk of executions and threats that are now being promoted by this movement, both on social media and offline too. Medics, journalists and politicians have reached out to me about being targets by threats like this. Again, no mention that David Curtin's on the stage and he's linked to government figures. There he is there. Completely trying to control the narrative, and pretty much has, because she's referred to it and it's now got millions of views, she doesn't know how much this is going to explode. She eventually does retweet me because she has to at the end of the day. It would have been so obvious if she hadn't. I mean, it's still obvious now, but at least she's got a little bit of like argument on that specific point. With this whole video that I'm creating, she's got no leg to stand on. And then a few minutes later, clear today too, is how online conspiracies about 5G, vaccines and COVID-19 have evolved as the pandemic has gone on, increasingly extreme and adapted to fit into narratives about nefarious global plots. I investigated these tactics for Panorama. So there, 5G is in reference to Piers Corbyn, someone that I've got on camera making threats like that and threats like this, that is just simply gone completely ignored by the BBC, Marianna Spring especially, and almost the whole mainstream media. In fact, not the whole, like lots of other publications have. I'm not sure at the time now whether they had reported on people like Piers Corbyn, but they definitely are now. So she's mentioning about global plots and all these things and kind of minimizing the idea of them, the potential for them. It's as if it's like a misdirection from what is actually going on. There is a global plot controlled by Steve Bannon and figures like that. And it's happening in all these countries that she mentions. That's the global plot, to spread disinformation. And she's pretending like there's not a global plot. There's not a global plot in the way that the conspiracy theorists are saying it is, because that conspiracy is to deflect and misdirect and to minimize the true conspiracy that's going on, the conspiracy fact that I am exposing. I actually tried to talk to Marianna Spring. When Nick Watt was harassed outside Parliament, she sent a tweet saying, "Radicalization by conspiracy theories and online abuse spilling offline are big topics after the awful harassment of Nick Watt. A sadly unsurprising escalation after a year reporting on this. I'm investigating radicalization and abuse. Get in touch." So she asks for people to get in touch. So I thought, maybe she's not seen me yet. I'll get in touch. So I send her own tweet and I say, "Hey, I've been following the people responsible for yesterday's attack on Nick Watt for a while now. I covered yesterday's protest here. I cannot stress enough how many people here today also attended the silent vigil. It's well over 20 and probably more like 50. And I think it's actually more than that now. If anyone thinks I'm giving this network too much attention, well, the whole media machine bought their psyop at Clapham Common. The chaos continues." So earlier in the video, I noted that she retweets a tweet saying that reporting works to expose these people in the hopes of getting them off social media so they can't spread this information. Why isn't she reporting on these people? Why is she ignoring me? And then I also say, and this is a very long thread on the events at the vigil. I'll be adding a load more really relevant information on the NRX and events in between now and then. So she platforms Shemirani again, and then I message her again. And it just all goes ignored. So she's obviously seen these messages, because she wouldn't ask for people to get in touch if she's not going to read the messages. So she is now very much aware of this, but she still continues to promote the content that she's made, which only feeds people into, if they like Sebastian Shemirani's views, they'll Google him and it'll come up with his far-right content that he's created with other far-right organizations like the Delingpole, James Delingpole, who works for Breitbart, connected to Steve Bannon, and the Renegade Report, another far-right podcast. Completely ignored. So if we go back to the denial files on COVID conspiracy to climate change denial, she says something a bit more interesting and obviously wrong about certain conspiracies. So let's see what she's got to say here.
I noticed on the White Rose New Zealand channel, you'd use that phrase, duped by alarmist climate change and COVID propaganda. How much do you see those two things aligning, COVID and climate change?
I think there's a general opinion that the climate change phenomenon and the pandemic are all part of a movement towards what's known as the Great Reset, that you've probably quite familiar with that term.
The Great Reset is something I've heard a lot during my reporting on disinformation. It's an unfounded conspiracy theory that a global elite is using the pandemic to establish a shadowy new world order, a super government that will control the lives of citizens around the world.
So this was released on the 13th of November. Pretty sure that's after my video on the cognitive elite. Yeah, that's a month after my video on the cognitive elite, which includes her. So that's kind of interesting. And she completely denies that the Great Reset is a thing, a theory with, let's just get the words correct.
Reporting on disinformation. It's an unfounded conspiracy theory that
An unfounded conspiracy theory.
Global elite is using the pandemic to establish a shadowy new world order.
That the global elite, you heard it. Let's go to the World Economic Forum's website, weforum.org. The Great Reset from June the 3rd, 2020. Do you know what happened before June the 3rd, 2020? Back in April 2020, I reported on the Great Reset before the World Economic Forum reported on it, that it was going to happen themselves. So let's see that. Reboot.
So if we had a neo-reactionary reboot,
Neo-reactionary
who
reboot.
would take shares?
Look at this. Moldbug. How to reboot the US government 2 years ago and 7 years ago. Now, you might think, well, this is a reset, not a reboot. One, they're the same thing. And two, in Curtis Yarvin Mencius Moldbug's blog, where he lays out the plans for all this, and they seem to be happening because I've read them and now I know what's happening. I'm able to kind of predict these things. He mentions reset. Let's put reboot in. There's only 2 mentions of reboot. This sort of transition in government is what here at UR we call a reset. Let's see how many times he mentions reset. Reset he mentions 15 times. Just in, can you see this? We'll just scroll down. Reset, 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 all over. So we'll just read this bit. This sort of transition in government is what here at UR we call a reset. This was written in, I think, 2009, so like 12 years ago. It's just like rebooting your computer, when for some reason it gets gunked up and seems to be running slowly. Are you interested in debugging it? Would you like to activate the kernel console? Perhaps look at the thread table, check out some registers, see what virtual memory is doing. Is a bear Catholic? Does the Pope anyway? Or perhaps it's a little more like reinstalling Windows. The gunk could be a virus after all. Rebooting will not remove a virus. Better yet, you could replace Windows with Linux. That way, you won't just get the same virus right away again. I think a Stuart restoration in England is about as close as it comes to replacing Windows with Linux. So Stuart referring to the monarchs. The reset it's not a communist plot. That's what the capitalists would want you to believe, so then they can stoke up the fears of the far right, like Red Scare, and blame it on communists, when really it's a corporate reset. Corporations are gonna be in power instead of democracies, and that's what Thiel means when he says freedom and democracy aren't compatible. The freedom to become a billionaire and democracy isn't compatible, because if we had a function in democracy, we would put an end to billionaires. There's so many studies and polls done that bear that out. People aren't fans of billionaires. They recognize that billionaires exploit the planet, exploit their work and their labor, and you can't have a function in democracy when the billionaires have enough money to do what the fuck they want and spread all this disinformation around the world. What does Marianna Spring have to say about billionaires? Nothing, no mention. There are 3 basic principles to any reset. First, the existing government must be thoroughly lustrated. I don't know what that means. You can Google it. There is no point in trying to debug or reform it. There is certainly no need for individual purges. McCarthy style, that's like a Red Scare, or for Fragebogen and Persiflage a la 1945. I don't know those references. This is the way that Mencius Moldbug writes. He does it in a way that you've got to sift through the bullshit, like just ignore those. It's to turn people like you and me off. We're not going to get the reference. He's sat on his ass after earning a few $1 million in the .com boom, and he's just read a lot and wrote a lot. Like, good for him. Except for the security forces and essential technical personnel, all employees should be thanked for their service, asked to submit contact information so that they can be hired as temporary consultants if the new administration finds it necessary, and discharged with no hard feelings, an amnesty for any crimes they may have committed in government service, and a pension sufficient to retire. Second, a reset is not a revolution. A revolution is a criminal conspiracy in which murderous, deranged adventurers capture a state for their arbitrary and usually sinister purposes. So this is what is wrong. We do need a revolution. We just need a revolution that isn't ran by a psychopath that wants to control the country for their own profit and ego. We need a revolution of and for by the people. And that's called a citizens' assembly, a dictatorship of the proletariat. People are switching off from democracy, but only because the current democracy isn't representing them. If we had a democracy that represents us, we would all really want to take part. Like, I can't wait to do jury duty, because it seems like a great way to learn about the process. And I think it's a noble duty to be able to judge your peers on their crimes and hand out fair punishments accordingly. And you are there to make sure that there's no corruption within that trial, whether it be from the judge, whether it be from the defense and their lawyers, or whether it be from the prosecution and their lawyers. I want to make sure that everybody has a fair crack at proving their innocence or proving the other person's guilt. I think that's a really noble act, and I think a lot of people would want that opportunity to take control of their own lives instead of letting politicians pretend that they're acting for us, but in effect, they are just acting for themselves, saving their jobs, making sure they get rich first, and having their ego stroked by the billionaires who they represent much more, and they just want to shove us out of and manipulate us and basically lie to us in the hopes that we might elect them in, and then once we elect them in, they just get to do what they want. Of course, a failed reset can degenerate into a revolution. That's what's going to happen. No doubt many involved in the rise to power of Hitler and Mussolini thought of their project as a reset. They were quite mistaken. It is a cruel irony to free a nation of democracy, only to saddle it with gangsters. There is a simple way to distinguish the two. Just as the new permanent government must not retain employees of the old government, it must not employ or reward anyone involved with bringing the reset about. A successful reset may involve an interim administration which does have personal continuity with the reset effort, but if so, this regime must be discarded as thoroughly as the old regime. This policy eliminates all meretricious pointless big words, motivations. Third and most important, a reset must happen in a single step. It is not a gradual effort in which a new party builds support by incrementally moving into positions of responsibility, as the Labour Party did in the 20th century. As we've seen, this Fabian approach only works from right to left. The only way for a reactionary movement to acquire power incrementally is to soil itself by participating in political democracy, a form of government it despises as much as any sensible person. Besides, since there is no such thing as a partial reset, there are no meaningful incremental policies that resetters can support. You can restore the Stuarts or not restore the Stuarts, but you can't restore 36% of the Stuarts. A reset is the result of a single successful operation. Ideally, the old regime simply concedes peacefully and of its own free will that it has lost the confidence of the people and obeys all legal niceties in conveying full executive power to the new administration. This is more or less the way the Soviet satellites collapsed. For example, it can get more complicated than this, but not much more complicated. Whatever is done, there should be no security vacuum and certainly no actual fighting. Real reactionaries don't go off half-cocked. There is a simple way to execute a reset without falling into the dead-end trap of politics and without the assistance of the military. Conduct your own election. Enroll supporters directly over the internet, verifying their identity as voters. Once you have a solid and unquestionable majority, form an interim administration and request the transfer of government. And it will happen. You may not even need an absolute majority. The modern regime is quite immune to politics, but it is tremendously sensitive to public opinion. It cannot afford to be disliked. Like every bully, it is a great coward, especially if it is given a comfortable way out. Thus, the amnesty and the pension, if you have your majority and still the regime does not concede, this and only this is the time to turn to the official elections. The truth about the people who work for government is that, in general, they despise it. They are demoralized and disillusioned. They have slightly more excitement and energy than your average Stasi employee circa 1988, but not much. Working for the government in 1938 was incredible, unbelievable fun. We've talked about his love of Hitler previously and reference to it from this blog. If you gave the entire civil service an opportunity to retire tomorrow on full pay, 9 out of 10 would take it and lick your hand like golden retrievers for the offer. So there you have it. The reset is real. The reset was talked about over a decade ago, and I bet it was probably talked about before this blog was written as well in other circles, especially with Jacob Rees-Mogg's father talking about a cognitive elite. I think it was like over 20 years ago. Marianna Spring, she's just there as a gatekeeper, distract you from real reality, and she's not a specialist disinformation expert. If she is, she's a specialist expert at spreading disinformation. One final thing, this isn't just about Marianna Spring. She's got a team behind her, and they are just, if not more responsible than her. She might just be the puppet being controlled by her team, and she's got no choice but to say the things that she has. I don't know. But they all need to collectively come out and fucking put an end to this nonsense. Stop gaslighting the nation.
My thanks to Jessica Bateman for that report, and to the rest of the team for their work on this episode. Producer Anta Dean, series producer Vibeke Venema, and editors Mike Wendling and Ed Main. Next week, we find out how Wikipedia has, for years, been battling climate change denial.
So she doesn't actually, I don't think she appears on the next one. I've listened to like the first 5 minutes and there's a different presenter, so I just didn't bother watching it. But yeah, she keeps mentioning her team, and like I say, they are equally culpable. They need to do something about it. If you'd like a more comprehensive overview and expose on what the reset looks like, please check out my video, Fascists Beware of the Neo-Reactionaries, because that lays out their plan and how they do it using things like passivity and stroking the egos of influential people like they've tried to do to me. Like I say, I've got direct knowledge of this. I've turned down all their offers. I don't do what fascists or authoritarians want me to do. I'm for the people. I'm for the 99%. And the only way that we can save our planet, save ourselves, and save the most vulnerable in society is if we have a citizens' assembly and we are the judge and the jury in the same way that we trial our criminals. We don't put that in the hands of a cognitive elite. We have experts that inform the population in a safe, secure environment that can't be infiltrated by big money influence, and then people are trialed accordingly. If we can do that for the lives of people who may be guilty or innocent, we can do that for ourselves and to control our own destiny. We do not have to rely on corporations. We don't have to rely on think tanks. We don't have to rely on a cognitive elite, and we certainly don't have to rely on billionaires. We have to stand up, make our voices heard, and make sure that they know a non-violent revolution is coming, and we will win. If you like my work and you want more of a spotlight being shone on the mainstream media and how they are controlling narratives and manipulating us and keeping us from certain truths, being gatekeepers, please support my Patreon. I've got a lot more ideas of how to make it more interactive, and I've got more ideas on how we get this ball moving, because like I say, we will win. They will not stop me, and if they try, then more fool them. Fascists, beware of the NRX, of Marianna Spring, of the dark entitlement. But yeah, thanks for watching.
I'm a neo-reactionary absolutist. I believe in a absolute world order, organized in a particular way.
When you're looking at a government is a corporation that owns a country. It just is. It's the same thing.
I'm Peter Thiel. I support people who are building new things. I'm not a politician, but neither is Donald Trump. And it's time to rebuild America.
Anything we can do to help this go on, and we're going to be there for you. And you'll call my people, you'll call me. It doesn't make any difference. We have no formal chain of command.